Hello, everyone. I welcome you. Nice to meet you. And nice to meet everyone. As you pointed out, many people see me. I don't see you yet. It's like the one-way mirrors they have in these, So let me begin by wishing everyone, since Rosh Hashana is upon us in the next, when is it? Less than 2 weeks. I wish everyone a very blessed year, materially and spiritually. In Judaism, there's an expression, "B'boneh chayim mezeinu," with your health, life, children, and parnasa, which is livelihood, all in abundance. So, being that it is coming into the new year, so see this as a type of pre-Rosh Hashana workshop with the title, "Can the New Year Really Change Your Life?" You know, cynics say that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Some people feel that that's a realistic statement, not just a cynical one. An even more cynical or realistic quote-unquote statement is that if you want things to stay the same, you got to do something to change. You got to change something. That's like, corrupt leaders who see there's somewhat of resistance to their leadership, so they say we got to change something to make sure that everything stays the same. And when you think about it in life, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but even if as we were younger, people may have had greater idealism and hope. The fact is, as life wears us down, so to speak, many of us become resigned to the fact that the status quo is very difficult to change. And as much as you try, even if you're motivated, you often gravitate back to your patterns, your routines, your habits. And I'm sure try changing something that you're stuck in, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's why New Year's resolutions don't really last too long. And in general, changing one's, as I said, patterns are very difficult. That's why it's a pattern. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible to actually even estimate the power of the status quo because it's very invisible. It's very silent. But when you try to change it, you see how difficult it is to, the exertion necessary. One-time change is one thing, but to maintain and sustain change is not an easy thing to do. So when people hear the line, okay, this thing will change your life, most of us we'll roll our eyes and frown at the prospect, because that's not easy, whether it's about losing weight or it's getting rid of kicking some habit. We know how difficult those things are. So then, of course, the question what begs the question then is, when we go into Rosh Hashana, what is the Jewish view on change? Can we really expect a new year to be new? Obviously, it's a new year on the calendar, but is it also something that can create newness in our own personal lives and relationships? Because especially in the area of relationships, that's one of the places that the casualty that suffers most from what we call stagnation. Stagnation means things, you get used to things, and then the tedious, monotonous daily routines begin to take their toll, and they just become our traps, and we lose that type of vitality and zest and excitement in things that we become accustomed to. There's actually an expression in the Baal Shem Tov, whose actual birthday is actually today, which I'll soon mention, as well as the birthday of the Baal Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of Tanya. Both their birthdays on the 18th of El, which was today. So the Baal Shem Tov has a line which really is rooted in earlier sources as well. In Hebrew, Tainuk Tmidi Eina Tainuk. Ongoing pleasure is not real pleasure. That pleasure is, one of its criteria is that it should be some type of novelty. Or to use it in another Baal Shem Tov's context, when he talks about the difference between a miracle and a natural event, he says the only difference between miracles and nature is frequency. Frequency, think about it. If the sun were to rise once in your lifetime, once in our lifetimes, everybody would come running out with their families and camera crews and pictures. Look at this scene. But since it happens every morning, we get used to it. So does it make it less of a miracle, or is it that we constantly need a new rush of a new high, something different? But why is it less of a miracle? Just because it's happening all the time? A healthy human being breathes approximately 18 times every minute. Exhale and inhale. Maybe children, when we get a little older, it's a little more. But 18 times. How many do you think about it even? But then you go to a hospital, God forbid, and you see someone struggling to breathe, then you realize it's pretty amazing, and you start studying the dynamics necessary for breathing to work. You realize it's not a simple matter. We take it for granted. We just breathe in and out. So actually in the book of Psalms, King David concludes the book of Psalms with the statement that he says, Kol neshama tahalel ka. Every soul praises God. And the commentary, the Medrash, which is the oral interpretation of that verse, says, what is he coming to say? That neshama, which is the word for soul in Hebrew, also has another meaning. You pronounce it neshima. In Hebrew, neshima is a breath. So the same word for soul is also the word for breath, which is why you find breathing is so much part of many spiritual exercises and so on, because it's actually the same word, neshama, neshima. Because when you look in the Bible, and when it describes the soul for the first time, the human soul, it says God breathed the divine breath and turned that into the divine spirit called the soul. So soul and breath are essentially synonymous. A divine breath, so as the breath that sustains, is like a form of energy, that when you breathe into something, you're like giving it life. Obviously our breath doesn't give life, but we can, like, let's say, breathe into a balloon and it gives it, expands it, inflates it. But as a metaphor, God's breath is a form of, is what's called soul energy. So every energy is a form of investing yourself into something else, and that's what makes it come alive in every possible way. So the Medrash, going back to on Psalms, that says, Kol neshama, every soul praises God, the Medrash says, every breath we take, we should be praising God. Because every breath is a miracle. And the fact that it keeps happening, that just means it's a bunch of miracles happening one moment after another, to the point that we don't recognize its uniqueness. So long before the police sang every breath you take, we already have a Medrash, almost 3,000 years old, that talks about every breath being a living miracle. But we are human beings, we are fickle, we're superficial often, and for us, when we need a rush, we need something special to happen. And what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching is that the truth is, the real miracles in our lives are seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, which will be about a lot of theme of what I'm going to be discussing in this class, going back to the question I asked before, which is, can we really experience true change? Because as I said, things seem to become, once we become part of patterns and routines, which we all are victims of, or you could say products of, it becomes very difficult to imagine real change. And as I said, the greatest consequence of that will be in the area of relationships. Because it's one thing, you want to change your business, you want to change your place where you live. You just moved here, right? So people make those changes. It's also difficult. There's upheaval involved, every shift and change. But that's one type of change. But psychological and emotional change is far more difficult, because that's like changing something that's making you tick. It's not just changing external environments. And that's where change becomes extremely difficult. So when it comes to challenges in our lives, it's one thing, yes, you can change your location, you can change your job, but can you really change your personality and your mindset and your heart set, for that matter, your emotional reactions to things? And we see, as much as we try, it's very, very difficult. If you have a short fuse and you have anger as a challenge, it's not that difficult. It's not easy to say, oh, you know what, I'll stop becoming angry. Because when something gets you going, if it's part of your so-called tool chest, part of your arsenal, you'll use anger for good or for bad. And the same thing with many other of our reactions to things, especially once it's been repeated many times, a number of times, it becomes very difficult. They say that a habit is formed after you do it around 18 times. It's an interesting number by us, and 18 is chai. I don't know if it's exactly 18 or 17 or 19, but the idea is 18 times, which is a real basis. One of the gospels of marketing and advertising is to make sure that every person sees something at least 18 times. That's when you can start getting their attention. So the 18th email you get of the same thing suddenly starts shaking you up a little. And it's not in our control. because it just begins to so-called wear down your defenses, and you suddenly say, hey, maybe I should look at this, etc., etc. There's a book out, I've mentioned a number of times, I forgot the author's name, but the book is called Habit. It's a best-selling book. Not that necessarily makes it better, but I'm just mentioning it for the record. And very interesting, the discussion on the dynamics of habits, how habits are formed, and, of course, how habits can be changed. Reading it, as you'll see some parallels, ideas that actually you go into the Torah, and especially Rosh Hashana, which is all about renewal, a new year, as I shall discuss, touches many of the themes that this book addresses in so-called contemporary language, is really based on Kabbalistic and Hasidic ideas and teachings. But one point that he makes there, which is very striking, is that it's how the brain works, because that's really where it all begins. Remember, when we're born, and this is not from the book, this is from Torah sources. When we're born, we don't have any patterns. Newborns don't have patterns, because they've not yet been exposed to any type of habits or attitudes and so on. It's like a clean slate, freshly fallen snow. There's no impressions, no leanings. Every child, of course, has a personality that's genetic, hereditary, but a personality still doesn't mean a habit. It means that's a predisposition. Just like we inherit some of the features of our parents or grandparents, but that doesn't mean that you're the creature of habit. Habit is formed through education, or lack thereof, through the parental attitudes, through cultural and social standards. Those are the three main factors that will shape who we become. As I said, number one is our parents and that early environment in the early impressionable years, our education systems, and of course our cultures and society and peer pressure and all of that. And then you become a creature of habit, because those begin to shape what direction you'll take. Just take a simple example. Where do we learn about love for the first time? We learn from our parents. Parents have a very loving and nurturing, respectful relationship that will impress upon us long before we're able to even register it, that that's the standard. And if, God forbid, their relationship is stormy and non-respectful and abusive and all the rest of the words that can be used to describe a dysfunctional home, that becomes the standard. And it's not easy to suddenly rewire somebody after they've been wired that way. The expression goes, the way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. So nurture and nature at some point become almost indistinguishable. It almost makes no difference. You could be born with a certain attitude, but you can also assume one very early on, and it becomes almost as difficult to change as something that's inborn, like you changing the color of your eyes. And I'm not talking about with cosmetics and all that stuff. I'm talking about, you get the idea. So then the question that we're coming closer to Rosh Hashanah, we're told it's a new year. But not just that it's a new year. In Jewish thought, a new year isn't just like January 1st, a new year on the calendar, and nothing happens. From a Jewish perspective, on Rosh Hashanah, actually there's a change in existence. The way the Kabbalists put it in a poetic way, the Arizal, Isaac Luria says that then as the sun sets, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which this year will be, I believe, Sunday evening, in a week from Sunday. This is the way he puts it. I'm translating from the Hebrew. It says, as the sun sets, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the entire existence and universe goes into a comatose state, anticipating its renewal as the new Rosh Hashanah enters. In other places, the expression is that with every Rosh Hashanah a new energy enters into the realm of our existence, an unprecedented energy that never existed and never will again exist. So in other words, it's not just a new year in the sense, okay, you not jot off and say, okay, we changed the calendar year, and so on. It's actually from a point of view of Jewish thought, especially mystical thought, time is energy, which is no surprise. Today, physics, that's a given. Until Einstein, we did not understand time that way. But today, time is considered not just some type of imaginary force that we humans use just to measure our days and our past, present, and future. But time is actually energy and can be measured, and time is relative, and all the other elements that especially Einstein in physics teaches. So Judaism long taught that time is energy. It's actually a Zohar. The classic book of Jewish mysticism says the following. In the Bible, in the beginning in Genesis, it describes existence. So it describes that, the word says, in 6 days God created heaven and earth. Not in 6 days, 6 days. So in Hebrew, Sheshis Yamim, seems like there's a missing word. If you saw a sentence that says 6 days God created heaven and earth, you'd say there's a missing opening word. The word should be in 6 days, or within 6 days, or in the interval, or the time of 6 days. There's like missing that in. And the Zohar asks that question and answers, because no, the verse is actually saying 6 days were created by God. Time itself is a creation. It's not just within a period of time something happened, time itself. And it discusses how each day of the week is its own energy. Sunday is the energy of love, and Monday is the energy of discipline, and Tuesday is the energy of compassion. If you're familiar with the sporadic structure and Kabbalistic thought, if you know my book on the counting of the Omer, I enumerated the 7 emotions, that each day has its particular energy, all the way going from Sunday all the way to Shabbat to Saturday. And then the cycle repeats itself, which the mystics explain is the reason why we begin counting again day 1. Because theoretically, nothing happens. I mean, why not? If time was just an invisible or imaginary measuring rod of movement, why do we not continue counting? Day 1, next Sunday should be day 7, then the next one should be 14, 21, 28, 35, etc., etc. And yet, we count every week, we start again, day 1, day 2. So the technical reason you'll hear for this is because it will become unwieldy. At some point you'll have day thousands or day million, and it's not practical. More psychologically speaking, people say, people want to feel that the week is over. So it's day 1, day 7, then we start again. So it's completely just I don't know if you're familiar with this, but when the metric system was developed, as the Europeans like to always remind Americans that it's a far more perfect system because it's broken by tens, and by us a foot is 12 inches, and a gallon is 36 ounces, and there's all kinds of odd and random seeming numbers. So when they instituted the metric system, everything is in tens, 10 millimeters and 10 meters and 10 centimeters, etc. They also wanted to institute that a week should be 10 days, not 7. Yeah, that was a consideration, because then everything would be uniform. Everything is the number 10. And 10 is like the perfect number, so to speak. 10 is a full cycle. But that was not accepted. Even in the metric system, it wasn't accepted, because I guess the reason is people couldn't wait 10 days for a weekend. That would be, even now they want to turn a weekday into 3-day weekday, 3-day work day rather, and 4-day, but 10 would be too much. As it is, people are going nuts. So that didn't work out. But from a Jewish, Kabbalistic, and Hasidic perspective, the reason there's actually 7 days in the week and we start from 1 is not a practical, it's not some type of just a practical reason. It's actually reflective, because time is a cycle of energy. I should say even more than a cycle, a spiral of energy. So as opposed to the usual image of time as being the river of time, like a linear river, just flowing from past, present to future, time is actually more like a spring, like a cycle. So it flows on a certain axis, and every year, when it comes back to that point, you're actually coming back to the same point of energy, just in a different plane, a different angle, that same point, which is why, think about it, how it infuses all our significant days with a completely different meaning. Think of your birthday. So we all have a birthday, a happy birthday. So most people think, okay, birthday commemorates what happened whenever I was born, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think that's as far as we'll go, right? Okay. But in truth, however, it's much more than commemorating. Actually, your birthday is recreating the point of energy that took place when you were actually born on a different plane. But it's exactly a recreation. So it's not just remembering something that happened back then, but actually you are being reborn in a sense. Your contract is being renewed. And the same thing is with the holidays, Rosh Hashana, Yom Kippur, all the holidays. They're not just commemorating events in the past, they actually are replaying them, like revisiting that point of energy. So to really appreciate holidays, it's not just, which is unfortunately something not taught in Hebrew school, or even in the yeshiva system. To really appreciate a holiday is not just to study its laws and its prayers and its customs, But to understand something completely different, that when that holiday begins, an energy enters into life, into your life, into my life, into existence. And the fact that we don't feel it is because we're not sensitive to energy. Energy, people feel energy. Bodies feel bodies. Souls feel souls. It would be like someone who's insensitive is not going to feel your emotions. Someone who's sensitive will sense your feelings. The same thing here. There's an energy that enters. So when Passover comes and we make a Seder, it's not just we're commemorating and it's a nice nostalgic event. As they say, nostalgia is not like it used to be. But rather, it's an actual recreation of the experience. So that changes the entire significance of it. And the same thing with Rosh Hashanah. That's actually the birthday of the human race, the birthday of existence. And that's happening that night. That's what the Arizal says, that the world goes into a comatose state, waiting and anticipating for it to be renewed. So you'll say, once I don't see any of this when I look out the window or in the street. Okay, well, how many things do we see? How much energy do we really see? Because as I said, we're essentially very, we live on a superficial level. We're impressed by things that affect our sensory tools. Our supersensory tools are far harder to discern. But that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that we have to become more sensitive, which is, of course, the whole point of Judaism in the first place, to teach us to be sensitive to those forces. And as we all understand, that where life really plays itself out is not on the surface level. It's all within. You know, what shapes us, what makes us happy or depressed, anxious or hopeful, and so on, are forces that you cannot see, and yet you know how much it controls your life. Everything on the surface could be looking good. You could have a good job, everything could be working, but you could be miserable within. And someone say, well, I don't see anything miserable, everything's working. You'll say, well, you don't know what it feels like inside. So we all know what it means to live on an outer level, and what really makes us tick is what's going on the inner level. So it should be if you really think about it, it should be quite obvious that if a holiday indeed is a new experience on the inner level, then it would be a great loss if you don't figure out what that energy is, because the day will come and go, and it'll pass by if you don't tap into it. And that's why we have the different customs and traditions of each holiday, especially customized, tailored to the energy of that day. Think of it like pails and containers to try to draw that energy. And every energy needs its own particular containers. That's the way the mystics explain a holiday. And it's a completely different take than most of you probably ever heard. Because that's not what you hear, as I said, even in good Jewish schools. So schools, they'll tell you what happened on Passover, the Jews left Egypt. Rosh Hashanah, they'll tell you about a bunch of another technical stuff. And that could all be correct. That's the historical dimension. But the spiritual dimension is lacking. And actually, this is the focus of all my classes, is really that spiritual dimension, because that is the key to relevance. Frankly, commemorating nice events that happened thousands of years ago may be nice, as I said, nostalgic, get together with family. It's a nice thing to do to keep the traditions going. But if you want something to be indispensable in your life, and to be relevant, and to be passionate, we're not really passionate about things we commemorate. We're passionate about things that are happening right now. And if you can connect to a holiday in that sense, in a personal, spiritual, psychological sense, that's a whole different relationship. And I always tell the story of that happened in the woman in Santa Cruz, California. Any of you have been to Santa Cruz? Okay, good. So a number of years ago, when my book Toward a Meaningful Life was first published, so I've sent by the publisher on a long tour across the United States, which first began 20 cities, then it turned to be 90 cities, not in one night, obviously, but and not through the internet, actually traveling. So it was quite hectic, but very enriching and gratifying, and a lot of, I can say it had a real narrative that in many ways changed my life. But now is not the place to go into in detail, but one of many stories that were very memorable was the one in Santa Cruz, where I spoke there at a bookstore. There's a New Age bookstore called on Main Street called Gateways, not the Jewish Gateways. It's a New Age bookstore, and it was a very interesting experience because if you've ever been to Santa Cruz, it has its own particular vibe. It's situated between the Pacific Ocean and the mountains, so it has its own climate, and it's very relaxed there. What can I say? as a hardcore New Yorker, born and bred here, it's antithetical to New York in almost every possible way. There, for example, no one seems to have a job. No one's rushing. It's calm, relaxed. I remember a group of young people in the evening. The sun was setting, and they were like milling about. And I was wondering, what are they doing? Are they going somewhere? In New York, you don't just mill about. Always, everyone has some agenda. And they told me, no, they're just young people in bliss. Okay. Whether it was natural or, let's put it this way, stimulated by foreign agents, I didn't ask, but regardless, they were in bliss. So actually, it was very comfortable there, I remember, because there's a spiritual side to the place, a very spiritual place. And when I spoke at the bookstore, I just felt in the room there was a few hundred people, and it was very comfortable and relaxed. People were very informal, sitting on the carpet, hanging around. And it was very easy to talk about soul and spirituality. You didn't have to go through the whole half-hour prerequisites of just establishing intellectually that you can talk about the soul and getting through all the cynics and skeptics in the East and West Coast, especially the Jews. Now, there were many Jews there. That was very clear to me. There's ways to recognize it, okay? After I gave my talk, a woman got up, I remember. There were questions and answers, and she said the following. She said, I grew up in Borough Park, Brooklyn. Borough Park is a bastion of some would call ultra-Orthodox Jews. And I went to Beis Yaakov, which is a very religious Jewish school. And she said that grew up in my home, was extremely extremely religious, and I could see she spoke Yiddish fluently because she says a few words. And she said, however, it was a nightmare in my life, those years. The nightmare was that all the schooling I got was very judgmental, very angry. My parents were angry people. My mother was angry. My father was even angrier. They were Holocaust survivors. And everything about Judaism was taught with negativity. It was all about guilt, punishment, retribution, punitive, and so on. And every time I asked questions, I was always silenced. And I was told to stop asking questions. That's not what a good Jewish Yiddish Shemedler does. You have to accept and just be like your mother and grandmother and great-grandmother. At some point, she said she was 17 years old and felt, this was the word she used, I remember it very vividly, my soul was asphyxiated. Asphyxiated. For those, suffocated is the more pedestrian term for it. But asphyxiated. And finally I decided, I'm out of here. She just left. She said, I left my home, I left my community, never to return. I'm sure my parents and family sat shiva for me. I went to the West Coast. From the way she described it, it sounded like in the late 60s. I went to the West Coast, first to Los Angeles, and I discovered my God. I discovered it through Zen Buddhism and through LSD. Okay. Then I moved up north, Haight-Ashbury scene, and then finally settled here in Santa Cruz. And I found my peace. I don't look back. I don't miss anything. I don't want to have any connection with that. I never even went back in any way or form. I'm happy. But I see you. I haven't seen a rabbi like you in years that looks like you. And you remind me of my teachers, she said with all the respect, And yet you speak about God and soul in a very comfortable, warm, and loving way. Where'd you get this stuff from? It's not the Judaism I learned. It's exactly the way she phrased it. And I could see from her question that first of all it was coming from a deep place, and also I saw other people where they were nodding that many people had similar experiences, exactly like that or similar. So my short answer was, I told her, well, we Jews have this thing called the 613-step program. So she laughed and she said, okay, I understand. But then afterwards, we all, she and a few other people hung out maybe to like one of these marathon night talks into 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. It was outside, the store closed at some point. And we just talked and talked and talked. And it was a very moving conversation, both for me and also for them. And I said to her, once we were in a small crowd, I said to look, I do not judge you, and I cannot in any way know what I would do if my soul was asphyxiated. So I'm not challenging or questioning what you did. However, I do want to tell you something, that you rejected a Judaism that didn't speak to you, obviously, and not only didn't speak to you, was everything antithetical to anything that is soulful. However, there's a whole other part of Judaism they never told you about. That's the sad part here. And I shared with her an analogy of the nightingale. The nightingale, the bird. This beautiful bird that God blesses with a very eloquent voice. And the parable goes like this, that when the bird, the nightingale, comes to God and says, thank you for creating me and giving me my gifts. However, I have a small problem. I may be perched on a branch one dusk and serenading into the night, and a predator looking for a good meal will be attracted to this piece of meat on the branch, and I need something to protect myself with from enemies. So God offers the bird a beak, a sharp beak, which is a form of defense. The bird inspects the merchandise and says, no. For an elegant bird like me, it's an unbecoming nose like that. Okay, fine. So God then offers the bird a set of claws, sharp claws, which again is another form of defense. And the bird rejects it for the same reason, that it's not elegant enough for me. So finally God says to the bird, okay, I'll give you a set of wings, in Hebrew, knafayim, wings. The bird looks at the wings, never saw wings before, and says, I don't understand you. You're the master of the universe. You created the world with such beautiful design. Everything's symmetrical, everything is so balanced, harmonious. I have enough body weight to carry with me to try to escape my enemies. You give me 2 more extra pieces of flesh, will just weigh me down further. And God, of course, says to the bird, no, little bird, these are called wings. And when you learn to use them, you can fly. You can soar. And it'll allow you to escape anyone that comes to attack you. So I shared with this woman and the other people sitting around when we were near a park there. I said, look, Judaism and the Torah are very demanding. It regulates every aspect of your life if you really know Judaism, everything. It talks about how to be born, how to die, how to love, how to eat, how to sleep, how to walk, even how to cut your nails. I don't know if you knew that. How to tie your shoelaces. Because every aspect of existence, of your life, is considered from Judaism's point of view sacred. And your mission is to sanctify your life. Not one aspect, every aspect. So every part of life is discussed in Judaism. I hope I'm not frightening anyone off with that. But there's a second side to it. If you look at it, it looks like a lot of body weight. Why do I need to do all of this? Some of it makes sense. Some of it is rational, some ethical. But there's a lot of it, you start wondering what it means and what's the significance. So it's a lot of body weight, a lot of responsibility. What do I need it for? I could just live a life with no obligations, no accountability. It feels a lot better that way. However, this same extra weight also has another side to its wings. So it may cause you to weigh more, but it also allows you to fly to places you can never fly without that extra weight. And there's no bird on earth that's going to reject wings just because it adds a little weight, even if a bird's on a diet, and birds are actually not on diet, so that's not a problem. And what's the saddest thing to see is, of course, a grounded bird, and what's even sadder is a bird that has wings and doesn't know it can fly. So I'm sad. It saddens me to no end when I hear what you say, that you were never told about the wings. You were just told about dead weight. So I understand why you rejected it. It makes total sense. But there's a whole other half they never told you about. It's hard for me to describe this scene, what happened at that moment. She started crying. I started crying. Everybody started crying. It's one big sob scene. No, because everybody was moved by, and everybody understood, we all have our moments in life where we make decisions, and then you find out years later that had I known something I didn't know, I may have made a completely different decision in life. So it wasn't judgmental. I wasn't trying to judge her. I wasn't even telling her she made a mistake. But, you suddenly hear, she said, how come no one ever said that? So I said, something no one ever told me either. I had to learn it on my own. Because whatever reason, our education systems are very mediocre. And they teach you the technical stuff. Do this, don't do that. Shabbat. How many people even know what the spirituality of Shabbos is? or other mitzvahs. We may know here and there something, a little taste, but never the whole prominence of it, that it can let you fly. That all these mitzvahs help you fly to places that you could never reach. Most people hear that for the first time. They don't believe it. Many people then tell me, "This is something you made up. I never heard it in my school. It's your Simon Jacobson stuff." But it's not. I can tell you that clearly, because when you study the mystical and the spiritual of Judaism, not the mechanical, not the laws, but the soul behind the laws. And that's exactly what the Zohar calls it. That there's the body of Judaism or Torah, and there's the soul of Judaism and Torah. Think of music. You look at musical notes, and you have no idea what they are. What would you do? You discard it. What kind of gibberish is this? A bunch of squiggles and nothing. Then suddenly you see somebody looks at these notes and plays an instrument, and magic. And it transports you to another time and place, and you say, where'd you get that from? Say, it's these notes. Obviously, it's not the notes themselves. They're just the language. But I didn't read that. Yeah, because you read what you're looking at is with your naked eye, and on a surface level, the notes mean nothing. But that's like the story with everything. You see words, and there's no soul behind them. You see traditions and rituals, and there's no soul behind them. So of course, what are you left with? These type of ancient, primitive traditions. Okay, I'll do it to make my grandfather or grandmother happy, to come to the Seder table or Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, make a little deal with God for the year, whatever it is that every one of us has in our superstitions and so on. But a sophisticated relationship and understanding that there's a whole soul dynamic going on is a dimension that most people have not heard about. And to be very honest, this is the mission of my life. Because when I discovered it, I went to yeshiva system and I went through the whole system, and I also saw what that woman saw, the irrelevance of so much of it, or the way it was taught, I should add. And then, in my own way, and again, it's a longer story, I discovered, not because someone showed it to me, because I just discovered it. I gave it thought. I said to myself, Judaism has been around for 4,000 years almost. It's impossible that 4,000 years smart Jews just been going through some type of brainwashing, ritualistic system. It didn't make sense. Because I didn't think I was the only smart guy around. I think, Jews have been smart all the time. I could understand, fine. The masses. You could see certain people who just follow conformists, that just follow what others say blindly. Fine, religious conformity. But it's hard to say that every Jewish leader, every Jewish thinker from the beginning of time was a conformist. Most Jews are actually not conformists. Like they like to remind us that, like the guy that said he loves to read, the Jewish guy, they were talking about newspapers. What's your favorite newspaper? This one said, this newspaper, that newspaper. And the one Jewish guy says, I love the anti-Semitic newspapers. He says, why? He says, because in the Jewish newspapers, it talks about how Jews are all fighting with each other. Anti-Semitic newspapers, they tell you that Jews control the banks, they control Hollywood, they control the world. It makes me feel very good, So, little do they know that we can't even control our own synagogues and homes. But okay, let them think we control the world. Great. Fine. So the point is that, so to me, again, this is a longer story. I don't want to talk about my own personal journey, just mentioning it as an aside. And I've talked about it a number of times in these classes, so it's not like something I'm hiding. It's just, I want to keep it focused. That came to discover that there's a soul behind things. And if you don't have the soul, whether it's in music or in physics or in mathematics, if there's no poetry to anything in this world, it will not be relevant. It will become something that's very tedious, very technical. Maybe you stick to it because of whatever reason, but they're not something that you're going to be passionate about. And the same thing is with relationships, whether it's marriage or love or sexuality. If there's a soul behind it and you feel it, if it becomes tedious, you may stick through it because of whatever commitment, but it's a whole different story when you feel the passion within it. And I'm focusing specifically on these words because of today's day, which is Chayel, the 18th day of El. As you know, Chay in Judaism, one of the most famous words everyone knows, Chay. Chay means life. Right? L'chaim means to life. Chay is life, and it's the number 18. So we say Chayel, we say the life of Elul. And actually it's the birthday, as I mentioned before, of the two great luminaries. They were both born on a Wednesday. And Wednesday was actually, in the creation, Wednesday was the birth of the luminaries, the sun and the moon. The Shneim Eretz Agdel. And they're referred to as the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, and the Baal HaTanya, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement. Both approximately 270 years ago and a little more than 300 years ago. And that was their whole purpose in their lives, was to introduce the soul, reintroduce, I should say, reintroduce the soul of Judaism. So it's not a surprise they were born on a day that talks about vitality. Chai. You could have Elul, which is a beautiful month, but when you say there's chayas in something, it means there's vitality. That's very different. That's like wings that carry you to another place. So in tribute to them, this is part of the class here, it's also a tribute to them, to bring it back to the question that I asked earlier about, so what about the new year then? With all this said, so what is the soul of Rosh Hashanah? And how do we tap into it? And how can it actually help us defy the odds? Which is that, as I said earlier, as the Cynics put it, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So there's actually an expression in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is Kehelet, from King Solomon, where he says, and if you've ever read Kehelet, it's quite a depressing book until the end of it, because it's King Solomon bemoaning the state of affairs of a very seemingly insignificant life. And in it, he says a number of statements, especially in the beginning, talks about the words that he uses are, like, for example, a generation comes and a generation goes. Ein kol chodesh tachas hashemesh. And there's nothing new under the sun. So in like looking at life and being introspective, he looks around and says, nothing really changes. Nothing new under the sun. It's just a change of names, characters, places. So I don't know if you've ever felt that way. Sometimes in life, you go through life and you just say, is there something really changing? The same politics, the same fights, it's just different names and different titles. Just another form of it. It's not a very encouraging, obviously, perspective, because then essentially renders your life into becoming just an old script. But that's the word he used, nothing new under the sun. To use the words, as I said before, from the Cynics, the more things change, the more they stay the same. How motivating can that be? But it's interesting, the expression he uses is nothing new under the sun. But what about above the sun is the question. So here's where the mystics and the Hasidic masters come in. They say that in life we have two options. We can either be a hostage to our routines, and then indeed there is nothing new under the sun, or we can travel to a place that's higher than the sun. In other words, we have two so-called souls within us, two voices within us. One is the voice of survival, that basically tries to figure out how to survive in this world. And that's a life full of routines and full of the doldrums of monotony that just takes over life. And then there's another dimension within us, we'll call it the transcendent voice. And the transcendent voice is that voice that gives you hope, idealism, looks to transcend the reality in which we live. And they're both equal voices within us. You'll decide which one dominates in your life. But the Judaism makes it very clear that we're given these two voices. Actually, in the same book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon puts it this way. He says, the ruach habehema yeredes lamata, the spirit of an animal, meaning its breath, the breath of an animal descends downward. V'ruach ha'odam oila l'mayla, and the spirit or the breath of a human being rises. So to use a Hasidic expression, it says that an animal has never seen the heaven. You look at the physiological structure of an animal, its head is usually facing down. I understand there are giraffes and there are some animals that have the capacity to walk on two, but generally speaking, animals face down. But it's not just a physiological thing. It's also a psychological one, a spiritual one. Animals are essentially focused on survival. Being a city boy, I remember the first times I went up to the mountains and I saw, lo and behold, a cow, an animal cow, not a human cow, a cow in the farm, grazing in the meadows there. So New York, what are the options we have here for animals? We have squirrels, we have pigeons, we have cats, dogs, and some rodents. I won't go into detail. Maybe a few other things, flies. It's not very. It's very small. They more or less eliminated all the natural species that once roamed in these streets of Manhattan not the streets, the wilderness that Manhattan once was. So here I see these cows, and I was very taken by it. I wanted to check it out. So I stopped at the side of the road, and I decided I'm going to study these cows. And it was very interesting. They move about very slowly, very deliberately. It doesn't look like a very exciting life. But I didn't sense any neurosis. None of them go to therapy. They don't have anxiety or depression. Every day is the same story. Graze in the fields, take care of their young, breed, train their young, and die. I mean, I didn't see all that happening, but I could envision it. And they live in the same habitats that they lived hundreds of, maybe thousands of years. They're not looking for better homes and country homes and better cars and fax machines and gadgets and iPhones and so on. And their lives, we call it animal bliss. It's very calm, very relaxing. Sometimes it's very envious, actually, when your life is really driving you crazy. We always almost like aspire for that animal bliss, just to have some calm like that. But we're not destined for that type of calm. We all have restlessness. Restlessness, of course, goes overboard. It becomes angst, can become anxiety. Anxiety can become a disorder. But I was interested in the contrast. And we are constantly looking to improve our lives. We have better homes, and we look to constantly grow, and so on. The human being, as opposed to the animal, Ruach HaAdam, looks up. Look what happened by our looking up. Just by looking into the skies, into the solar system, to the stars, we developed a whole NASA program that cost billions of dollars just to satisfy one thing, curiosity. What's out there? Is there life out there? That's what human beings are like. So the contrast is quite significant. It's not just, as I said, physiological. So there's a beautiful story that Tzemach Tzedek, who's a grandson of the birthday boy of today, the birthday Rebbe of today, which is the Alter Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, third Chabad Rebbe, was a little child. He was playing with his friends on a ladder. And all the other kids were afraid to climb to the top. He was the only child that climbed all the way to the top of the ladder, which was pretty high. After they all finished playing, scampered down, his grandfather was watching, Rav Shneur Zalman, whose birthday is today, and said to him, I think it's his 270th birthday to be exact. Was it 270? Yeah. He said to him, so why were you different than all the other kids? Why were they afraid to climb to the top and you weren't? And he answered, you could see from his answer why he became who became, a great leader himself. He said, very simple, Zayd, Grandpa. He said, when they were climbing, they kept looking down, so they saw how high they were afraid to climb higher. When I was climbing, I kept looking up. I saw how low I was, so it motivated me to climb higher. Think about that. When you're with people that are less accomplished than you, most likely it's not going to be very motivating. You'll probably say to yourself, hey, look how much I've done compared to them. But when you're with people that are more accomplished than you, you look up, you'll always feel motivated. You'll feel a certain envy. You look at me compared to them. I'm not there. You see this in marathons, in athletic competition, all competition. Fierce competition brings the best out of you. If it's mediocre competition, you're not going to achieve excellence. And we may not like it, but that's what pushes us, looking up. So if you look down, you may have a more, let's put it this way, a more content life in the sense, not much bothers you. When you look up, it's going to cause you to be restless, and it's going to cause you to aspire. So there's a certain element of discomfort, but there's elements of growth that are incomparable, that you can never achieve when you look down. And that's why, when you look in the Torah, when it talks about the human being, it says, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. The closest approximation of what a soul looks like is a flame. Interesting, a flame. It's the only physical object that we can see with our naked eye that defies gravity. I mean helium, and there are gases if you put them in a balloon, but a physical object that you can study is a flame, which is not surprised why Judaism puts so much focus on flames. Shabbos candles, Hanukkah candles, even, God forbid, a yahrzeit candle. The menorah in the temple has a prominent role. Why? Because a flame is a metaphor, is a mirror of your soul. Look at a flame, it flickers. and rises upward. It's restless all the time. It's always rising. It defies gravity. The wick is a metaphor for the body. And that's the struggle. Are you going to be a wick? Are you going to listen to your wick, or are you going to listen to your flame? Now, of course, if there's no balance, and one is just transcendent, they don't have anything grounding, it can become very difficult. To the point of not just angst, healthy restlessness, but a point of real anxiety. Or even worse, some of the great geniuses that OD'd at young age, you talk about musicians like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Morrison, these type, because they had great aspirations, they had nowhere to ground it. So you just like, you know where to go. So in Jewish thought, there's a much discussion about balancing transcendent highs and being grounded in this world. It's not easy, because a person who has a transcendent soul finds it very difficult to be preoccupied with details and the tediousness of routines. But on the other hand, without that, it's like a flame without a wick. That can be also dangerous. On the other hand, a wick without a flame is death, basically. It's a person who's not searching, no restlessness at all. So I've always mentioned this cardiologist that comes to the class once in a while. And he has a very difficult life, and a difficult marriage, a lot of challenges. He's always telling me about how he wishes animal bliss. He wants just calm. And my joke always with him is the same one. Whenever he tells it to me, I said, so what do you want, like a straight line? He says, no, not a straight line. Because he knows, as a cardiologist, you know what a cardiogram looks like, right? If it's a straight line, it's not a good sign. What you want is to have is a wave, a cycle like this. Because that's life, exactly that. Our hearts, healthy hearts, and healthy breath, I mentioned breath before, what is it? It's a balance between exhale and inhale, between contraction and expansion. So it's like a wave like this. If it's flat, it's death. If it's extremes, too high peaks and too low valleys, that's also not healthy. Finding that balance is the hardest thing in life. In the Torah terminology, it's called rotzeh and shuv. Sometimes it's translated as tension and resolution. We all need a measure of tension in our lives. Not tension. It doesn't mean anxiety, doesn't mean too much. And then you need resolution, and then you need new tension. That's the healthy balance. And when we understand that, first of all, it gives you some peace of mind that knowing that having a restlessness and knowing that you don't always have what you want is actually a good thing. Secondly, it also gives you a plan. How do you really create such balance? And you have something to work toward. So to go back to the discussion about Rosh Hashana, and why I'm bringing all this up is because in life, as I said, there's two dimensions. If you focus on the resolution part, you're too satisfied and content, usually their routines settle in, and life will become pretty tedious. The vitality, the excitement, the anticipation that we have when something special happens is a transcendent experience. It's different. As I mentioned before, a tainug tmidi ain't a tainug. A pleasure that's ongoing and continues to repeat itself loses its power. So the idea that there's something that eludes you and you're reaching for it, a mystique, is extremely healthy in life. See, we live in a world, especially today, where we think we can't control everything. You can press a button 24/7, any time of the year, and get any type of fruit, even out of season or whatever it is. So it creates an illusion that you have power, you can control anything. So suddenly when it comes to things you can't control, let's say, for example, a relationship, love, your children, finding the truth, your soul, finding God, whatever it is, those areas are all the biggest things in life. There's no buttons to press. There's nothing you can acquire. You can't control it. Real things in life really fit under a category which we call they emerge, and they're a process. Two things that are very rare commodities today. We don't have time for processes. We want it now. Instant gratification. And we don't want things to emerge. We want to be able to pull them. But try pulling a flower out of the ground and try and open it up by force. What will you have? Real things in life have to blossom. They take time. You do the right things. You nurture, you water, you cultivate, and then you have results. But again, the machine world at which we live in, technology, creates the illusion, you can just do things mechanically, quickly. And I'm not knocking technology. Technology has plenty of great blessings. But as we all know, and the line from the first day when computers first became popular was junk in, junk out. Or garbage in, garbage out, whatever the expression is. You put garbage into a computer and you'll have a lot more garbage. As a matter of fact, it's like a number cruncher. So you put a little junk, you get a lot of junk, and very quickly. If you put good things in, it also speeds it up, and you can get it and multiply it and distribute it far faster. So you send an email out that's destructive, it can quickly create destruction all over the world. You send out an email that's constructive, so its viral impact can change the world as well for the best. So technology is completely neutral, let's be honest. It's like a knife, like any tool. You use it for good things, it's a good tool. If it's not, it's used for bad things. Let's just to simplify matters. With all its so-called power, at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's just a sophisticated tool chest. But going back to what the things that really matter is to realize that we're not trapped by the tools. We shouldn't be trapped, I should say. And when you learn to transcend and learn to find your soul, the flame, the restless flame, that's where you discover newness in life. Because imagine a person living on a soulful level, there's nothing in life that is the same. It's only on the body level, on the mechanical level, on the outer level that things seem the same. Someone that's alive within, whatever they look at becomes magical. I don't know if you've ever met people like that. It's usually children, newborn children, young children. Look at them. They look at something that we would think is completely meaningless, and they find excitement there. So many of us think, the child is stupid, naive, they don't understand it's meaningless. Maybe the child is smarter than we are. We get used to things. But the truth is that people, the real people in life that are the ones that are filled with energy and life and the vivacity, and they are contagious in that sense, are people who see magic everywhere. The extraordinary in the ordinary. They don't need a special magical moment. They can find magic because it's in there. It's energy. If you need an example, think of nuclear energy. Where is nuclear energy exactly? It's right here. Any object, a follicle of hair, can produce a tremendous amount of energy if you know how to create fusion or fission. I'm talking for the positive ends of, obviously. Iran, of course, is on people's minds, fine. But that's not what I was addressing. But the point I'm making here is that anyone knows today that matter equals energy. E equals mc squared. Einstein, again, was the one that discovered that. But from a Jewish mystical point of view, it was always that way. The entire world was simply about energy bottled up, packaged in what we call matter. So you look at at any experience, you could look at it as just another experience, or you could look at it as an opportunity, a spiritual opportunity, which is why the mystics call it elevating sparks, bitter hanitzutzes, elevating sparks. So I'll share with you a story I've shared a number of times. It's a Baal Shem Tov story with a Jew called Chaim Rappaport, who was one of his colleagues and students. And the Baal Shem Tov sent him once on a mission, which was common for him to do. He came back, he fulfilled the mission. We don't even know what it was, but we know the second half of the story, which is the following. So when he returned back to the Baal Shem Tov, said, mission accomplished, the Baal Shem Tov was very intrigued to know how he traveled to get to the place where he had to fulfill the mission. Which seemingly trivial matter, who really cares how he traveled? But Reb Chaim saw the Baal Shem Tov was so eager to know, so he began to tell him, I went here, I traveled on this road, I went to this. Where did you sleep over? One night he slept at an inn, another night there was no inn around, so he rested at the side of the road. And in the morning he woke up, he says, I washed my hands, said my prayers, then sat down to have a breakfast, a little bit of food. And then I took a cup to get some water. So at the side of the road there was a spring of water, a brook, a be'er mayim, a brook of water. I took the water, I made a blessing, and I drank it. Baal Shem Tov suddenly jumped up with this excitement and said the following words. He said, that brook of water was waiting from the beginning of time for you to come, make a blessing on it. Now think about this approach. I've used it for my own life, and it's a tremendous lesson in life. I've traveled quite extensively in my lifetime so far. Many different places. Many times I go to places, many people have been there. Sometimes you go to places like what they call, Robert Frost calls the road less traveled. Especially for a Jew, especially for one that looks like me. So, and there's something, when you think about it, it's like when you walk in the woods, and no one has ever, you think, has anyone ever walked there before? The trees, there's no path. Wherever you go, there's opportunities. And think about it, maybe from the beginning of time, that space and that moment has been waiting for you to come there and do a good deed. If you have an attitude like that 24/7, it will change your whole life. Then you don't need to find some type of thrill or high. This is the biggest high of all. It's right around you. It's just waiting for you to release it. It's an opportunity. Now, business people understand this perfectly. People who really own businesses, they're on call all the time. Wherever they go, vacation, they're always looking for clients or some way networking, connecting, the whole thing. But they're doing it for their own personal business. The Baal Shem Tov was teaching that there's spiritual opportunities. Each of us is allocated with a certain amount of divine sparks that you will encounter in your life. And the question is, will you use those opportunities? Will you ignore them? Will you use them and realize the potential that they're waiting for you to come, and only you, to release those sparks? That is a quintessential Hasidic approach. Some people ask, what does Hasidus come to contribute? That's it. That type of awareness, cognizance, sensitivity. And that's what he was teaching Chaim Rappaport and all of us. It's an approach to look at life that even though we're so preoccupied with survival on the surface level, there's a whole other substrata of experience that we're not seeing with our eyes, but it's waiting there, and that's the real reason that we're here. So you may think you're traveling to a place for business, for vacation, for some other reason, for a party, for a simcha, for an occasion. And in truth, it's God, God leading your footsteps. The only way to get you there is to get you to think that you're going there for your own selfish reasons. Because you wouldn't be going there if God came and said to you, or an angel came and said, listen, we need you on a spiritual mission. You look at your calendar and say, I got no time for that, So it's called Mesabev Sivas. God figures out ways, basically, to manipulate you, that you say, oh, business, fine, that I have time for. It's an opportunity. So you go, you think you're going for one reason, and there's always another reason. Think about this. Next time you end up somewhere, and this happens, we're all going to end up somewhere tonight, tomorrow, But anywhere, always look for the things that you didn't plan for. And you'll be surprised that sometimes those are the things that will be the most meaningful, much more than what you planned. What you planned can also work out. I'm not suggesting that. But the unexpected, the spontaneous. And if you have that type of attitude, it changes a lot. Many of us have that control thing. I can't do anything except my agenda. Maybe you should loosen up a bit and say, okay, I'll do my few things, but I'll leave a little room. Who knows why I'm here? A little humility in that as well. A mensch tracht, God lacht. How do you translate that in English? A man thinks and God laughs. In Yiddish it rhymes. I'm thinking how the expression. Yeah. So the point is to look for those spontaneous things, the things that let's put it this way. There's the script of our lives that we are aware of, and there's a script that we're not aware of. And the real life plays out in the script you're not aware of. And especially in the area of relationships. You think relationships go by plans? Yeah, you can make a plan. It may work out, but most of them does not come by plan because it's about human emotions. And not only your own and other person's. How exactly do you plan that? But if you're so rigid in your structure and your control, how could you be open for that spontaneity? Like the joke, 9 o'clock, spontaneous dancing, that type of thing. But that's a planned spontaneity, as they put it, which of course is not spontaneous at all. That's just another control game. So the most real things in life will always come when you're not expecting it, because your expectations, your plans actually get in the way. They may be brilliant, but they're still human, and they're still predictable, and they're still based on your own predispositions and mindset. So you want to know how you create a newness in your life? New energy will enter on Rosh Hashanah, whether we like it or not. The question is whether you will be ready to receive it. And that comes down to your attitude. You stick to the attitude that you had till now, guaranteed you're going to have the same results. I'm sorry to say that. Why? Because as they say, nothing changes, nothing changes. I coined the line, I don't know where it came from, but it just emerged one day. If you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, tell me, what's the mathematical result? What are you going to have? You're going to have what you had. Brilliant, right? You think what you thought, you do what you say what you said, you do what you did, you're going to have what you had. That's a certainty. If you want to have a different result, you have to think, speak, and do something differently. The cliche goes that insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. But we're all doing that all the time. And we say, why did nothing change? And someone says, so what did you change exactly? I tried this. But changing starts from within, attitudes. I can tell you from, I don't even know the numbers, but the hundreds of people, thousands of people I've counseled or spoken to, come for advice. Every story is, of course, a unique one. Everyone has their particular issues. And there's no one size fits all, case by case. But there is one thing in common in any problem, that you're always a part of the problem. And I am part of my problem. That's always a rule. Because it's part of you. You're subjective. You have your blind spots. And you cannot say that you have no participation in part of the problem. Maybe how you're trying to solve it. Maybe good intentions. But the fact is, a subjective person, or to put it in the terms of the Talmud, ein chavush mater satzmi. A person who's in fetters, tied up, cannot untie themselves. A person who's subjective cannot see beyond their subjectivity. That's a given. So what do we have? We have the ability to acknowledge that. I mean, you acknowledge that, that's where the first opening. So I'll always ask people, I say one thing. Do you think there's another way to look at your issues than the way you look at them? And often, right away, people say, I'm sure there are, but I think I look through every possibility. I've hear that again and again. I said, but who decided that you look through every possibility? You decided that. That again is like the doctor that says, I'll tell you when you need a second opinion. That's the whole point of a second doctor. Not when you tell me, I want to hear another opinion that you don't have. That's not your opinion. The arrogant doctor that says, I'll tell you when you need a second opinion. Or the guy that says, yes, sure I have blind spots, but I know what they are. That's not a blind spot then. Now this is not meant to humiliate or belittle someone. It's on the contrary. The first sign of wisdom is recognizing that you have your perspective, and that's it. Now, if you're wise, you open yourself up to hear another perspective. And sometimes it's not comfortable to hear another perspective. Let's be honest, we all know that. I include myself in that. You don't always want to hear something you don't want to hear. But so you have two alternatives. You live proud that you think you got it all figured out, but your life isn't working. Or you're actually open to hear some different perspective. It's one of the hardest things to do is to hear another perspective. I'm not talking again about maybe business advice. Even there, it's not always easy. But especially personal, emotional issues that touch the deepest part of you, that touch your childhood, that touch your parents, that touch all your psychological buttons and so on. Very, very difficult. But that's not hopeless, because we do have two voices. We have the voice that is survival, and we have the transcendent voice. We have the ability to go above the sun, where there everything is new. Beneath the sun, it's not that way. So here's the story. Rosh Hashanah coming, there will be a new energy that will enter into your life, into all of our lives, into existence. The question is whether you're also new and ready to receive it. Because if you enter Rosh Hashanah with the same attitude you had the day before, so with the newness of Rosh Hashanah, how could it affect you? You're completely desensitized to it. It would be like a person coming into a new environment, but they have exactly the same depression they had the day before. So the new environment may be there, but you won't even see it. You won't appreciate it. That no one can do for you. So God, the holidays can offer us and say, here is a new opportunity. Whether you're going to grab it or access it, that's up to you. But knowing this, as we say, Yediyas HaMachal Chetzi Refuah, awareness of a problem is half its cure. Knowing of this issue, knowing of our own subjectivity, knowing that we could be our own worst enemy, is a tremendous insight. Because then that opens you up that maybe there's something I haven't seen. And it's not meant, as I said again, this is not meant to demoralize. It's meant to open us up. It's just like climbing a mountain. You may have a perspective of the horizon that's so-and-so. You climb a little higher, and you're going to have a different perspective. And you climb even higher, it's even a broader perspective. Unfortunately, however, our own fears, our own insecurities, and our own habits and patterns, exactly, that keep us trapped in the way we see it, and we really don't want to climb higher. Even though it may be the thing that's the most important thing for your life, can redeem you, can free you. So that's what we have. So it's not a surprise. I was thinking about Chayel's 12 days before Rosh Hashanah, today, the 18th of El, that it's in a way like a preparation, because these two great leaders, these two great mystics, in a way gave us tools how to find newness in our lives, freshness in our relationships and everything about us. And when you have this attitude, I can't say that we can suddenly go cold turkey from one attitude to another and suddenly 24/7 we're see the magic in everything in our lives, but you can slowly do this. You slowly incorporate it by beginning slow, like tomorrow, maybe just once, a lunch break or whatever you're doing. Think, is there something else going on here in the script that I'm not aware of? Just thinking about it, trust me, will open up opportunities. You say something, a nice, kind word to someone that's a stranger sitting near you, wherever you are. These things end up opening up doors. Now, we don't always know what it's going to be. That's the whole part of the adventure, that it's unknown. If it was known, it would be part of it, would be back to the routine. These are ways you change things. So people say, if I had some new, if God appeared and created some miracle in my life, I would have a new attitude. It's exactly the opposite, my friends. You have a new attitude, and then God's energy can enter. If you don't have a new attitude, there's nowhere to go. It would be like somebody who is asking for a blessing for whatever it may be, but doesn't have a container to hold it. You have to create the container, and then the blessings have where to manifest. And that is, again, another big issue that many people just don't realize. And it's like right near, it's in your hands. What you're looking for is right there. Are you creating the container? Are you holding your hands like this or like that? So obviously, if it's not like this, how are you going to be able to contain what's given to you? How do you know it wasn't given to you and you missed it? Which is pretty sad to hear. I remember this class years ago, there was this guy, young man, young woman, they were dating for a long time, serial daters, they call them. And anyone that met them, you could sense that they were meant for each other. And but then they decided to break up for the ridiculous reason that they thought was very big and important, was he was starting a new company, she was moving to another place, some completely circumstantial thing. Time wasn't right. Okay, fine. I remember it was sad to me because no one knows the future, but you already meet somebody that's more or less compelling. They did appreciate each other, they loved each other, and then get distracted by something that's completely, that doesn't last, and to compromise a future like that, everlasting future. But I didn't say much because people make their mistakes and they have to live with them. That's it, No one, you can't control other people's lives. Okay, interesting twists and turns. A few years later, I meet them individually. What's going on with your life? I'm married. Who are you married to? She's married to that guy and he's married to her. I met them separately. And I've said, interesting. So you got back together? Yeah. And they realized at some point, because his business didn't work out and her thing didn't, whatever. Their plans didn't work exactly as it. So they were given a second chance, which thank God, that doesn't happen to everyone. And they realized it. What I saw was that I met them later and I saw, today they have a few children, they have their heads straight. And I said to them, just, talking, we talk quite often, I said, what would you tell a young couple if you met that were just like you and were made the same mistake? They said, there's nothing you really can say. You get so blinded that even the most important truth that's good for your life, you just simply don't see. I'm still trying to push them to figure out something to say, since they were there. So you see things in life, we write all kinds of scripts, and then other scripts are being written, and we don't even realize it. In their case, it's a happy ending. But what about how many cases that's not a happy ending? And I'm not suggesting. I'm an eternal optimist. I always believe that people's soul can wake up because the soul is always there. It's like a pilot flame. I may be asleep, but my heart is awake. So somewhere there's something awake. And you need that catalyst, you need that thing to touch. Each person here, each of you has your life story, has your trajectory, and you have to apply this in your own way. I'm sure nobody here has the same story. But these ideas are applicable to everybody, and Rosh Hashanah is coming, And the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to go prove the case. The best proof would be that if you indeed go in with a new attitude and you do indeed access this new energy and your life indeed changes, then you'll know that it happened. That's up to us. So we learn about it and we're taught about it. And the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, they all teach us these principles. But then the final step is yours. There's no one that can make that step for you. But knowing about it is a very great beginning because it creates awareness. And cognitive conditioning leads to emotional conditioning. That's the rule. That's one of the principles that the Baal Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the second birthday of today, teaches the concept how cognitive conditioning can transform your emotional conditioning. Which is, of course, a basis in real psychology, is that even though your heart may be trapped by routines, your heart may be fearful, but the mind can always see beyond your immediate here and now. You can imagine things that are greater than you are. And that imagination in turn generates, sparks, something that the heart can begin to listen to. Think of it like a child that's afraid and hiding under a table. And you say to the child, listen, don't come out, but I want to just give you a picture of what things are like. And the child can envision a reality that's not so fearful. Slowly, the child will peek out and see whether it can actually accept it. So the mind can be a great tool, sometimes they call the cognitive life raft, where emotionally you can't really go there yet because you're fearful or you're trapped or whatever the reason is. But your mind can go to places that your heart may not be ready to go to. And then when your heart hears enough times, the mind says, it's not so fearful, it's not so unsafe, then the heart can begin to follow. This is a big principle in the Chabad philosophical teaching, especially in Tanya, the Moyach Shal Talalev idea, where the mind, the conditioning of the mind can actually train the heart slowly to acclimate itself to new realities. Because emotionally, obviously emotions are subjective. A healthy mind is reflective. And reflection always allows you to see things more different perspectives. It's the emotions that block us. But like he explains in chapter 9 in Tanya, he says, just like the blood of the heart rushes to the brain, the emotional subjectivity also takes control of your brain to make it think that it's not able to do things that it really could do. And what you have to do is reverse it and let your mind tell your heart what to do, not your heart tell your mind what to do. Sometimes it takes a push. Sometimes it takes something that is just, you just do it. Behavioral change, for example, and so on. There's many ways to get to that type of place. And obviously all of them are fitting in this month of Elul as we approach Rosh Hashana, which is different behavioral, emotional, and cognitive different approaches, and each one has its own set of tools. So behavioral change means simply sometimes just doing something differently, even if you don't feel it, you don't understand it. You do it this way, why don't you try this way? A jolt to your system can hurt because sometimes it opens up doors. And behavioral change can lead to deeper change. Sometimes that may not work, so you have to start with the cognitive, as I said. Where you imagine, you dream, you aspire. What would you like your life to look like? You may not be there. You may not even have hope that you'll be there, but at least dream. The dream can open up doors. The emotions are the most difficult ones to maneuver because they're the ones that really keep a person most trapped because of their nature. They simply are subjective. They see things on a very impulsive way, and that's how they react. But that doesn't mean we don't have the ability to control. And that's why we sit and talk to each other like a class like this. Anything you study, anything you learn, helps open up vistas or new horizons. And as new horizons open, your emotions begin to see another perspective. They may not be ready to go there right away, but the more exposed they are to another reality, the more chances that they may taste it. It's like getting an appetizer. So the mind gives you the appetizer, and the heart slowly learns to try and see what is there to lose, etc., etc. So there's many approaches to take as we conclude this year. I want to share another story that happened, very similar to the story I told Santa Cruz, which also was very, very interesting. I was in a number of years ago, I'm thinking how many years, 15 years already maybe, 12 years. So I have a good friend who used to come to these classes when he lived in New York. His name is Peter Himmelman. He's a musician, comes from Minnesota. Actually a son-in-law of a man called Shabtai Zusha Zimmerman. otherwise known as Bob Dylan. Yeah. So he used to come to the classes here. Then he moved to California. He lives in Santa Monica. And he said, you know what, why don't we do something radical? Let's do a Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur service only for secular people. We'll advertise it as such. And me and him will lead it. He'll lead it from the musical rock approach, and I'll be the so-called the spiritual guide. And first the idea was intriguing. I didn't know if it would happen, but he pulled it off. 2 years in a row we did it. They rented a theater on Wilshire and Montana, I think. It was one of these old theaters. I don't know if it's still there. And he advertised in certain, he found the places to advertise. Basically high holiday services for the uninitiated or something like that. For someone who's never done it before. And it was interesting. We'd have no clue how many people would come. Well, it was interesting. Almost 1,500 people came in this theater, that was more like the capacity was something like that. And it was for me, it was a life-transforming experience. I never really did it quite that way. And because here, there was nothing to take for granted. There was no prerequisite services, and everyone reads Hebrew, and turn to page 300 in the blue, and 600 in the gray, and 700 in the brown, these type of things. There was none of that stuff, because nobody was really into praying altogether. But we wanted to do a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur at the same time with integrity. I didn't want to just sit there and have a bull session, So we found some creative ways to do it. Singing and stories and telling, and everything was very hands-on. There was not taking anything for granted. It was a real guided service, so to speak. I don't like the word beginner service. I wouldn't call it that. Guided. Everything, we didn't just say things. Everything was explained. And we chose certain prayers to focus on. We had a chazan, a cantor, who said the entire prayer quietly, but we focused on a few things. I did it, Peter, and so on. And then we had some very serious long sessions, like after Kol Nidre's service, Friday, Yom Kippur night. We didn't do Rosh Hashanah. It was Yom Kippur only. I remember. It wasn't Rosh. I don't think it was Rosh. No, it was Yom Kippur alone. Just Yom Kippur. So, Jews go to synagogue anyway. And here it ended up being a very interesting crowd. As I said, it was really uninitiated. And I don't think there was one person there that was really observant. And which was really good, because there was, like I said, nothing taken for granted. There was no preconditions. And then we had, after the Kol Nidre service in the evening, we had a discussion group. So everybody stayed around. I would say out of 1,500, maybe 1,300 people stayed, which was pretty interesting. After an hour and a half service, they hung around that night. Questions, discussion, open questions. Any question was acceptable. And it was maybe 2 hours we sat there together. It was really fascinating. The questions, the challenges. It was, it was not necessarily easy questions as well. Very skeptical questions. What is this whole thing and all that. And the same thing on Yom Kippur Day, a little less crowd in the morning, but later for Yizkar service, and then later Ne'ilah, which is at the end of the day, was also almost the same number. And again, we had a long afternoon, between 1 and 4, maybe 1 and 3. We had again a discussion. A lot of interesting things happened in that service. I learned a tremendous amount myself. Just seeing that interaction and seeing when you do it hands-on. And for myself, who grew up with it, I could also, all fall into the trap of what you call lip service and mechanical by rote experience. So it was very energizing to have to really apply myself to the prayers and really, what is it saying here? What are we reading? Why are we reading this? It was very, very inspiring for myself as well. The reason I'm telling the story, there's a lot, as I said, many different sub-stories, many events came out of that, I can tell you. Many people I met. But there was one particular episode I wanted to share, was this. There was a woman there at the service, and I didn't hear from her at the time. Next year, Yom Kippur, when we didn't do it again, for whatever reason, I think they couldn't rent it out anymore, whatever, there's some technical reasons. She called me in New York. She said she's coming to New York for Yom Kippur, and she wants to know where there could be a service that was like the one she had last year in Santa Monica. Okay, my heart sank. When am I going to send her? There is no such service, because they just don't do it this way. So I told her, look, I can't tell you there'll be exactly this type of service. I could send you to a certain synagogue. I sent her to a few synagogues, to one synagogue particularly, where I knew she would have, at least she wouldn't be judgmental. It would be more comfortable, but not necessarily with the whole intensity. Anyway, she went there, She called me afterwards. She says it was nice, this, but it was not what she's looking for. And then she shared with me that she's an avid Buddhist, and she follows Buddhist rituals and practices. It's Jewish, but that's where she finds her sort of spirituality. And she's thinking that maybe now Yom Kippur can do it for her. She doesn't need the Buddhism, And she very sincerely. The next year Yom Kippur, she said to me, "What do you think of me just staying home Yom Kippur? I want to honor the day, but instead of going to synagogue, which doesn't speak to me, instead of going through these prayers, which I don't understand, I stay home and I'm going to read my Buddhist meditations. I'll do my stuff, and that will be my Yom Kippur." Now, frankly, it's not like she was coming again from a very sincere place, and God understands. And I was thinking to myself, but there was a tinge inside of me that bothered me, not because I fully understand people have different ways of experiencing spirituality. But what bothered me was, I'll tell you what, I felt almost like competitive, to be honest. I felt, one second, can't we find in Jewish stuff that's just as good for a woman like this for Yom Kippur? So I said to her, let me ask you a question. What happens if you and I will go through some classes? I'll give you some guidance through the Hebrew prayers on Yom Kippur, and let's see if we can come up with meditations that are just as good as your Buddhist meditations. And I told her my reasoning. She said, absolutely. I'd be honored if you have the time to do that. So I said she was completely sincere. She was not at all, wasn't like some type of thing, Buddhism is better than Judaism. That was not her attitude. It was a very pure, very straightforward. So I just felt I want to do that. So that's what we did. We sat, we had like a few hour sessions, one week after the next, the month of Elul, for Yom Kippur, for Rosh Hashana, Yom Kippur. And I myself, I did research, and I chose certain prayers, and I explained them. Anyway, to make a long story short, we're talking now, this service was back 12 years ago. Then this whole episode was like 9 years ago. Today this woman is a married, observant Jewish woman with children. And what happened was that she did find in the Yom Kippur prayers as much power as she had in the Buddhist. And it was not a point of knocking anything. And it changed my life in a way, because I suddenly realized the power of Yom Kippur like I never realized it through all my years of my life. And in fact, this book that you've all been pushing, the 60-day book, is an outgrowth of this experience. I write about it in the introduction. You'll see there the story briefly, not with all the details I shared here. Because what happened was, I decided to do then was, something, how many other people out there have no clue about the power of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? So I decided to document it in a book in a way that can be used like a journey. The book is structured like a journey. That's why it's called 60 days, a 60-day journey through this month, through Rosh Hashanah, through Yom Kippur, all the way to the end of the holiday season, with each day being a step in this journey and the deciphering of the prayers and so on in a way that's palatable and accessible to really anyone, whether one is familiar with the services and the holidays or not. And it's all a tribute to that woman and that experience. That's why I wanted to share it. So here's a perfect example of what I said earlier. I could have not gone to Santa Monica, stay home with my family here, Yom Kippur, do it my own conventional, traditional way. Not only that, I could have also found the woman wants to do Buddhist chants, fine. But and I'm not saying this to toot my horn, I'm just saying, because this is how I was trained. Here's an opportunity came my way. A woman's calling me, almost like begging that she wants a Jewish way to do it. How could I not apply myself? And it took time, and work was not easy. But what happened was, besides for her life and what she's gone through, and she's an unbelievable inspiration. Anyone talks to her, she's like one of these people, she's the walking powerhouse because what she's gone through. She's like real. Nothing's taken for granted by her. Her spiritual journey is hard earned, and what she's reached has all been through real hard work. So she's a real inspiration, including to me. But beyond that, taking it and turning it into something, this is something that we all have opportunities like that. Don't think you're so small that you are not able. Everybody here has your unique talents, skills, and some of them you've discovered and probably using, whether it's in business or in personal life and so on. And then there's all kinds of skills and tools and resources you have you're not even aware of yet. That's the real part of it. The wings that you haven't even spread. Because let's be honest, how do we even discover our special strengths? It's usually by mistake. How does a musician find out they're a musician? It's not like they suddenly sense it. Sometimes it happens by accident. I for example, I never knew I could write or communicate and so on. It was, I think it was in summer camp, and the guy that was supposed to write a color war song or something got sick. They said, yeah, your father a writer, maybe you should try. I said, I never wrote anything, I don't know what you're talking about. I sat down near a tree, I had a tune in my mind, and I wrote some lyrics. Now, I can't say it was great. I look back at it, it's a little embarrassing. But I tried it, and I did it. It's like anything. How do you know if you can swim? You jump into the water, you take some lessons, or you don't take lessons, and you start swimming. That's how it works. That's life is. Most of it happens by accident, if we can call anything an accident. It doesn't happen because you sat down, I'm going to actualize my potential. What potential? You don't even know what your potential is. That's why it's called potential. Once, some of us may be blessed that you have the right mentor or right parent that sees in you something and they help recognize it. But that's a rarity. That's a great blessing if you have that. Most of us just discover certain things either in time of crisis, in time of suddenly everything's thrown on you, you didn't expect it, or you haven't discovered. And I have no question there's many strengths inside each of us here that we have not yet discovered. So this approach is not just about being a better Jew or celebrating Rosh Hashana in a deeper way. It's about you and your destiny, your life, your script. Where is it going? And it's all there inside of you. So when people say, nothing's working in my life, or everything I try doesn't work, that's a very, maybe true from your perspective, but from another perspective may not be accurate. There may be things you haven't tried because you don't want to try it, you're afraid to try it, or maybe you don't even know how to try it. The key thing is to have the humility to know that there are horizons that have yet to be conquered. And every one of us can make that statement. It's not just a few of us. And even if you've accomplished much, there's always more. There's always more to climb. Because the flame is always rising. That's the bottom line. And it's your choice. Are you going to be like a flame that's looking up? Or are you going to be like the wick that's looking down? Comfort zones are very good to keep yourself comfortable, but not for anything for growth. Comfort zones can be very, very dangerous. Not in the dangerous way, because they create mediocrity. You're comfortable, I'm comfortable. What am I going to change anything? Everything is nice. That's why, sadly, usually change happens in times of trauma or crisis or loss. But we don't have to wait for that. We have here coming in the next 2 weeks, holidays that give us tremendous new powers. And they're yours for the taking. But you have to create the containers, which begins with your mind, your heart, and your actions aligned to that. Even if you're not in the mood, you have to create an attitude that's receptive to newness, or else it cannot enter your life. Not because it doesn't want to, because there's nowhere to go. You have to have an openness. If you're not open to be receptive to something, how could anyone tell you anything? Whatever they say will not enter. So we have to be able to be open our eyes, our ears, and I mean that more than just the physical eyes and ears, just a general receptivity. Each in our own way, finding a trusting friend or mentor that you can talk to openly, that can tell you things, and you ask them to kick you in the pants, is always a great blessing, because they don't judge you. They're not talking about someone who's looking to criticize or invalidate, but someone that loves you, someone that cares. As they say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. People who care can help you greatly, especially if they're a friend and they know what you're like. But you have to be open to that as well. A good friend is not going to come and impose themselves on you. You have to invite them in. People who impose themselves are probably not the people you want anyway. You want someone that you invite in and say, I am receptive. And it takes humility. It takes sometimes swallowing some pride. But if it's with some people that are trusting, what's there to lose? Now I know the next question is, how do I find someone that's trusting? As everyone I know, I don't trust. Okay, good. It's a good question. Ask the question. Maybe that's what you should pray for. Find someone you can trust. And that itself is an opening. There's always a solution. That's the bottom line of these lessons. We'll talk about this more as we go to Yom Kippur, the pre-Yom Kippur discussion on this matter. But from a Jewish perspective, the point is there's no challenge in life that you're not given the resources to address. Doesn't mean it's quick. It doesn't mean it's easy. But you have the resources. You have to have complete confidence in those resources. Because without that, you can't fight wars. A war can only be fought, I mean psychological wars, when you have confidence. Once you lose confidence, once you lose that type of sense of self-esteem, then you become a real victim. Because no matter what happens your way, you always say, I can't do it, and so on. Even if You are able to. If you convince yourself you're not, I think they say about, I don't know if it's bumblebees or some other bee that is able to do something that science says completely defies all odds. It's able to carry a weight that's completely beyond its capacity. And they all wonder, how is that possible? And then they discovered why. Because the bumblebee was never told that it's not capable. If we'd ask scientists and professors and doctors, they would say, you're not able. So the bumblebee would never do it. So sometimes just simply not knowing that you're not capable, it makes you possible that's capable, and that's it. So sometimes not always good to be aware of everything. That way we get some things done in life. We can always reach a place. An interesting twist, but it's something to think about. So you see from that how we can be our own worst enemies. We can be our own best friends, obviously. But the worst enemy is the worst possible thing, because if you're your own worst enemy, who's there to blame? There's no one out there to blame. So more can be said on all these topics. I hope this is some food for thought. If it keeps you a little awake, restless tonight, I'll see that as being a tribute. If it didn't, then okay, I guess I didn't speak proper words from the heart. I was a guy that I remember years ago come to the class. This class is going, just for the record, and I referred to years ago, I'm talking about 1982. So we're talking about 33 years. Yeah, I'm at least 33 years old, in case you're wondering. But 33 years, and it's been, what a journey. Thousands, probably 30, 40,000 people have come to this class. Everybody here is a link in a chain, because it's never been advertised. It's all word of mouth. So it'd be fascinating to be able to maybe create a link. But in those years, I didn't even know, there was no email addresses in 82. There were no computers in 82. It was just beginning, it was prehistoric times. We lived in caves and wore skins, that type of thing. No, none of you are old enough to remember 82, right? That's good. Yeah. Okay, fine. I used a typewriter then. You know what a typewriter is? An actual typewriter before the word processor. So those years, a lot of people from the music and entertainment industry, that was the core group. And then it just started just a journey, what can I say? But I remember a guy that used to come almost every week. He was like, he was in the music business. And one day he calls me. And he was coming every week, religiously, every Wednesday. I think then the class was Thursday, then we changed it to Wednesday. And he was coming one week, he doesn't come. The next week he doesn't come. Okay, fine, I never imposed on anyone. I'm not going to, everyone has their journey, their reasons. He calls me up a few weeks later. He says, you probably noticed I haven't been there. So I said, yes, I noticed. He said, well, let me tell you the reason. It's not because I love your classes. They're great stuff. It's changing my life in many ways. And that's exactly why I don't want to come anymore. That's what he said. He said, because listen, I'm young, I'm sexy, I got a lot of fun to have still in my life. I'm not ready for the seriousness of life that you're teaching. So I got to take a break. And in a few years from now, I'll get a little older, and my, the fun is over, I'll come. That literally, he said that. It was funny, but that's what he said. He said, it's too, no, 1 second, so he says, because you're disrupting my whole life. Now I think about it at night. I used to not think about myself. I was busy partying. He was a real party guy. One of these guys, swingers. So anyway, so fine. We both had a good laugh. I said, I appreciate you telling me. I'll see you around. One day we'll see each other. A few months later, he appears at the class. I couldn't control myself. I didn't say who it was. I just said, I didn't even say he was there. I just said, there's a guy that called me that tells me that these classes are making him miserable. But it's the first time I really felt good about making somebody miserable. It's like, they say some people have their job is to make happy people miserable and miserable people happy. So that was the line. Anyway, he began coming again. Today, as the good Lord would have it, he's living in the old city of Jerusalem with a long beard, far more religious than I am, what can I tell you? So that was his journey, just sharing this little thought. So I've had a lot of good, interesting experiences in my life. And they're still unfolding. Sometimes people come here, I haven't seen them in 15 years. It's a journey. I wish it upon all of you that you should do things. And this was a perfect example of non-planning. I never planned this class. It started 32 years ago without any plan. The guy called me up looking for inspiration. a mutual friend introduced him to me. We sat down, he brought a friend along, and we just started talking. The next week he came back, brought another friend, and that's how it's been going. The only thing I can say is I show up every Wednesday, no matter what. I can keep on doing it. And then the internet came, and we started broadcasting, blah, blah. The point is, I'm trying to say is anything you start something new that's good, and stick to it. You cannot imagine what kind of fruits it will bear. Just like I couldn't imagine. Every one of us can do something and stick to it, and you'll see that it'll create new things. In other words, basically, newness is generated by newness. Do something new, it will breed something new in your life. You don't do something new, it's unlikely that it's just going to be some miracle from heaven. I'm not saying it's not possible, but that's not something you can depend or rely on. In semchen ala nes. We don't rely on miracles. You have to open something up new in your life, some new decision, new resolution, try something new, host something in your home every month, but consistently, not a one-time thing. And you'll see new things will enter your life. It's a given. But I see, and that's like one of the easiest things to do, but one of the hardest because it's challenging your habit. It's challenging your pattern. And, very difficult to introduce a new routine when you already have so-called a whole schedule figured out. So that's my practical suggestion on that end. And I wish everyone again a ksiva v'chsima tova, as they say, a blessed year, sweet year, materially, spiritually, everyone, whatever blessings you may need, whether it's health, whether it's finding your right soulmate, or recognizing your soulmate and building lasting, loving and lasting relationships, blessings for children, blessings in every, and parnasa, of course, livelihood. And for those that made a move, they say Meshana Mokim, Meshana Mazel. When you move from one place to another, even physically, and definitely spiritually, it opens up new channels as well. That's also newness. And we should be able to open up these new well springs of new, fresh energy to enter into our lives, and then the magic happens. So until next week, every Wednesday, we do this 8:15, 8:30 we begin every Wednesday, and we'll have another class next week, which will be before Rosh Hashana, then one after Rosh Hashana, and I think after that, Yom Kippur is Wednesday. So I'll already announce that when the time comes. Now, if anybody interested in the 60 Days book, I think I have one left here, but do you want that? So I'll give that. Okay. No, I'll bring more next week. But
I'm fine with this for now.
Okay, fine. You can also get online, and also if you don't mind, if you want, we send out a daily 60. It's like an excerpt from the book, a daily free email that you can feel free to subscribe to. If you haven't left your email address, just do so right there on the table there. And okay, until next week, everyone have a very blessed week, and look forward to see you again. Be well, everyone. Thank you. So is it better live or recorded?